Hello, everyone. My name is Luigi Galimberti. I'm a board member of Artis. Artis is a worldwide network of art residencies. We have more than 500 members in 75 countries. This is our fifth webinar in the series, Residencies in Challenging Times. The series is organized in collaboration with the IASPIS, which is the International Exchange Program of the Swedish Arts Grants Committee, with the support of Creative Victoria. Why this series? The main reason is for us to discuss about COVID and the impact of the COVID pandemic on arts residencies, as well as on artists and professionals in the wider creative and cultural sector. COVID has brought an unprecedented disruption. There are more than 1 million recorded deaths so far, which translates into loss and mourning in our communities. So this is the main impact of COVID, which we always have to keep in mind when we discuss this. But of course, the impact is also on the economy, and particularly the impact will be felt and is felt on an already fragile cultural sector. At the same time, we felt the urgency to broaden our conversation and include two topics in our series. The first is what art organizations can and should learn from the Black Lives Matter movement. And the topic of today's webinar is to discuss about the environmental challenges that define our era. Today with us, we have two speakers that I'm very grateful to for having accepted our invitation. Our first speaker is Lucy Orta. Lucy is an artist, an academic. She's a professor at the University of the Arts London and a colleague of mine as well. She's chair of art and environment, and she founded the Art for Environment Artists in Residency program. She's a prolific artist with many exhibitions, a couple in Paris. She's actually sitting inside one of the exhibitions at this very moment, talking to us, and also together with her partner Jorge Horta, they run again a very prolific collaborative duo. And with us today there is Marco Maria Zanin. Marco is a photographer, a researcher, currently at the University of Lisbon, and she's the founder of Humus Interdisciplinary Residency. These are the questions that will frame today's discussion. The basic point is, can we travel? Should we travel? Is it worth it, considering what we know about traveling and the impact and environmental footprint of traveling? That's the basic of our discussion. Lucy will present. Then there will be a discussion between Lucy and Marco, and there will be plenty of time for questions. But again, feel free to type your questions, and soon the presentation starts. It's very welcome to receive your questions as soon as possible. However, before leaving the floor to Lucy, I would like to quote some passages from a letter written by a South American indigenous leader, Nemonte Nenquimo. Nemonte is the co-founder of the indigenous-led nonprofit organization Fable Alliance. She's the first female president of the World Annual Organization of Pastaza province, located in today's Ecuador. This letter was actually published a couple of days ago in The Guardian. I apologize in advance for the lengthy citation. However, I do think that this text that I'm going to read highlights two fundamental elements which bear relevance to today's discussion about art residencies and cultural exchange. The first element is the environmental and social damage caused by our society, which is largely based on excessive consumption, and traveling is definitely a significant component of that. And the second element is the need for knowledge to dispel ignorance, which in so many cases drive actions that damage our environment and society as a whole. I quote, "My name is Nemonte Nenquimo. I'm a Waorani woman, a mother and a leader of my people. The Amazon rainforest is my home. I'm writing you this letter because the fires are raging still. The corporations are spilling oil on our rivers. The miners are stealing gold. The land grabbers are cutting down primary forest. so that cattle can graze, plantations can be grown, and the white man can eat. I'm writing you because our elders are dying from coronavirus, while you're planning your next moves to cut up our lands to stimulate an economy that has never benefited us. In each of our many hundreds of different languages across the Amazon, we have a word for you, the outsider, the stranger. In my language, that word is kowori. And it doesn't need to be a bad word, but you have made it so. For us, the word has come to mean the white man that knows too little for the power that he wields and the damage that he causes. You're probably not used to an indigenous woman calling you ignorant, but for indigenous peoples, it is clear the less you know about something, the less value it has to you, and the easier it is to destroy. In all these years of taking from our lands, you have not had the courage or the curiosity or the respect to get to know us, to understand how we see and think and feel, and what we know about life on this earth. I'm going to end my introduction here, and I will leave now the floor to Lucy.
So good evening, everybody. I'm going to share my screen now with you. So as Luigi just mentioned, I'm an artist, and I'm also Chair of Art and the Environment at the University of the Arts London, and I form part of the Centre for Sustainable Fashion. Okay, so I have a couple of slides here. Before I talk about the Art for the Environment residency program that I founded at the university, I just wanted to show you a couple of the experiences that Jorge and I have had in the most extreme environments. Here in Antarctica, you can see our Antarctic village. This was a project that we were dreaming of realizing since 1995. So it wasn't until 2007 we were actually able to find the means to go to Antarctica and to be able to install this village. And as you can see here, a tent village with minimal impact on the environment. And yeah, it was incredibly important for us to realize this project. I'll just show you the next slide and ask the question, do these function as a project? These are obviously the renders, the project proposal renders that we made before going to Antarctica. Do they serve the purpose of as actually presenting the project, presenting our ideas, presenting our concept, presenting the artwork in comparison to, I'm trying to go back to the slides. I'm not sure how to work this. Hold on. Yeah, here we go. So back again to the actual experience. So being there, being embodied by the extreme environment, working under those extreme conditions to present this ephemeral artwork. And there again, the render. So just a question, you can be the judge which one is the most impactful. And then also what was important in this experience, of course, was the collaboration with the scientific community. We were hosted by the Marambio base on the peninsula of Antarctica. And you can see here the energy, the dynamics of working together with that scientific community. Absolutely tremendous in, again, the most extreme conditions in Antarctica, setting up the village. And just to show you how it all started, so the scientists were wondering why artists and what artists were doing coming to Antarctica. Why did we want to create an artwork in these extreme conditions? And in order to present the scientists the project, we organized a football game here with the football shirts that I created before in the studio. Each football shirt is different on the front and the back and made up of the countries of different, the football shirts of different countries around the world. So in fact, you don't know who you're playing for or with. So in a sense, this was really important, the bonding and the binding together of the scientific community around the realization of the project Antarctic Village No Borders, which has now become one of our main projects in our practice. So since 2007, when we were able to realize it, it's still ongoing, this project, and we now have a community of over 40,000 people connected via the Antarctica World Passport. I'm not going to go into too much detail about that, but just to show you one of the projects. And then a second project in the Peruvian Amazon and the Brazilian Amazon. So we had the opportunity to travel with Cape Farewell, a British artist-run organization that brings together artists and scientists to work together to explore the impacts of climate change on the Amazon and allow the artists to understand the scientific knowledge that's being gained in the Amazon. You can see here the scientists working, and we were working alongside them, collecting soil samples to measure the carbon content of the soil and measuring the diameters of the trees here to understand the growth patterns in the Amazon. And the second trip to the Amazon we made, that was in 2009. And 2019, I joined the Lab Verde Art Immersion Program in the Amazon as a workshop leader to take part in the exchanges that the Brazilian organization Lab Verde to organize every year in the month of August. So we traveled twice to the Amazon. And just to show you the kinds of expeditions that we go through, so starting on the glaciers to understand the impacts of the receding glacier up in the Andes Mountains, so we're at 4,500 meters, and descending down through the cloud forest to visualize the precipitation, the canopy of that forest that's stretching, you know, over so many thousands of kilometers to the ocean. And then walking down through the cloud forest to the Amazon basin. Actually, we walked to the Madre de Dios river, which is a tributary of the Amazon, and stayed in different scientific lodges along the Madre de Dios river to understand the work of the scientists and to partake in it, and to gather information and knowledge that then we could translate into artworks. Let me just see if I have an artwork to show you here. This is actually a performance that I undertook in the Brazilian Amazon during the Lab Verde residency. And I'm marking out a meter square in the Adolfo Duque Reserve on the periphery of Manaus in Brazil. And together with the scientists, we've earmarked a hectare of land in the Amazon. You can see the graphic data there on the middle slide. And each meter by meter, so 10,000 meter squares, has been allocated a number, and then will correspond in the future to artworks that we create in this project, which has become known as the Perpetual Amazonia project. And for each artwork or for each distribution, we will offer a certificate of moral ownership for this meter of land in the Amazon. So this is one of the actions that I undertook in the Brazilian Amazon, but we've created many artworks since that witness and document species loss, amongst other things, and notably, as Luigi mentioned in the exhibition that I have here, very much dedicated to loss of biodiversity and the impact of man on the environment. Images of how scientists work by marking out the trees. I mean, had I not gone there, I would have not understood these graphic messages that are left by scientists in order for them to return every year to be able to record the diameter of a tree, to record the sample, to record the growth, to record all kinds of things, the species that are living in that tree, etc., etc. And the recordings, the taggings, the markings that I made are a poetry, verses of a poetry that was written by Mario Petrucci, an eco-poet that wrote a poet called Amazonia, for a film that I produced subsequently to the Peruvian Amazon trip. So that was just a little introduction to the kinds of extreme environments that I've been partaken in. And what I'm going to talk about now is the Art for the Environment International Residency Program that I set up at the university in 2005. And I instigated, when I was appointed chair of Art Environment, that was in 2013, and it was a 3-year post. And I wanted to leave something behind from my chair appointment to stimulate the graduate community, for them to question their status quo and the role in this changing world, and to take up action through practice. So the Art for the Environment program became a legacy of this post. And today it provides young artists and designers, because the University of the Arts is a multidisciplinary university based in London, the University of the Arts London. But it provides them with dedicated time and space to think and experiment in new relationships with very diverse, changing social and natural environments. And since the instigation of the residency program in 2015, we now have just under 20 host institutions. And you can see here the distribution of the residencies around the world. I'm moving the cursor around so that I can also see the screen at the same time. And we have the majority are in Europe, in Spain, in France, and the UK. And we have worked with a partner, COG, in New Delhi. Thread is in Senegal. The Center for Art and Ecology in Mexico, Lab Verde in Brazil, as I just mentioned, and the Banff Center for Arts and Creativity. So these are the partnerships that we've set up. And the reason for having a very diverse partnership base was to offer as many experiences as we could to the students. So some of these will be in urban environments and not necessarily natural forest environments like Lab Verde or the mountains, for example, the Rocky Mountains in the Banff Center. So that they can also question both the their environmental impact, the impact of their work, but also the social and interactions that can be created in these residencies through the different environments that we've established. So I'm going to very briefly present 3 scenarios where I think residency practice in situ cannot be replaced by a virtual experience, as we're talking about the experience of online and whether we should continue to send our students overseas and to engage with these host institutions. And it's also the reason why I will continue to champion the importance of a residency experience. Yeah, just wanted to show this image. It relates really to my first scenario. So I have 3 scenarios I mentioned. So the first scenario is a profound connection humans can establish with nature. The second scenario will be the emotion of observation. And the third scenario will be the social exchange. So here we have the forest, the Brazilian Amazon. This is an aerial photo taken during the expedition, the Lab Verde expedition that I went on. And it's now well established that trees and plant species communicate. And of course, authors like Peter Wolleben, who's just written The Hidden Life of Trees, have given this great popular appeal. What he describes in his book is underpinned by research conducted by universities such as the Aiken University and Max Planck and the British Columbia University, where scientists have, for example, recorded tree messaging. So they message their distress signals, electronic signals, via their root systems and across fungi networks. And I wonder if you've heard of Shinrin-yoku, which has been widely practiced in Japan since the 1980s. It translates as forest bathing, and it's medically prescribed as a therapy treatment for a number of ailments designed to open up the senses to well-being provided by forests. And in the 90s, researchers carried out advanced studies on the psychological effects of silvotherapy, which found that after only 40 minutes of walking in a forest, the participants saw their stress level, the heart rate and blood pressure decrease. And among the scientific benefits observed was the strengthening of the immune system. And this is thanks to a biological process of the phytoncide. So these are molecules secreted by trees to defend themselves against bacteria that we also absorb. So to illustrate again how this operates when our students are going on residency, I've provided 2 examples. So if I may, I'm just going to quote Yifit. I'm listening to the sounds of my breath, developing a sonic perception of my body in the soundscape. I shift my attention to other sounds, reinforcing with my own voice by sustaining or strengthening what I hear, many patterns, repeated in an ungraspable shifting tempo, creating rich polyrhythms, a huge diversity of timbres and pitches, insects, birds, a falling fruit hits the ground, a monkey in invisible canopy, drops of water hitting the leaves like the sounds of crackling firewood, the crackling of branches. Can I smell traces of smoke? So Yifit is a sound artist. She just completed the MA in Sound Arts at London College of Communication. She undertook the Lab Verde residency in Brazil in 2019. And she says that forests reverberated her voice, and the density of the trees and canopy reflected the sound waves and created an echo, as if she was singing in a closed space. And of course, had she not been there, so going back to my point about establishing this profound connection with nature, had she not been there, she wouldn't have been able to feel that sensation of being in the canopy amongst the trees. And since returning back to the University of the Arts, she then concentrated her practice on the recordings that she made in the Amazon to be able to use those as a database of sound for her works that she now presents worldwide as a sound artist. This is Madge Hall. So she was a PhD student in sonic arts at the London College of Communication as well. And her project was called Whispering Trees. Now she undertook her residency at the Yorkshire Sculpture Park in Wayfield. And here she left a trail of radiophonic transmissions. And what she was doing was exactly what the scientists have been recording, is the electrical signals that are transmitted by trees. So she pinned here probes into the trees. She worked together with the landscapers of the Yorkshire Sculpture Park, so as not to endanger the trees anyway. But she's inserting electronic probes that created an electronic radio circuit, which she was then able to transmit via radio frequency to the general public in Yorkshire Sculpture Park, so that the visitors visiting the park. And so she's actually visualized those sounds that the scientists talk about that we don't normally have the opportunity to hear, to understand. She's made it incredibly participative in a way. Now, the second scenario that I mentioned is the emotion of observation. And I've taken the example of Rachel Beacon, who is an MA drawing student at the Wimbledon College of Arts, and she went to the Banff Centre in Canada. And I'll quote Rachel: "The mountains in stillness and the mountains in motion, falling apart in front of your eyes, chunks of rocks splitting, shattering, then tumbling down the steep slopes, tiny pebbles, grains of sand, and huge boulders being eroded, split and shed. The sense of extreme violence unfolding in extreme slow motion collapses a sense of time and space together, bridging the ancient and the immediate, the concrete and inconceivable, binding them together in one moment and one place." She wouldn't have been able to realize her drawings had she not been faced with the immensity of the landscape in Banff and in correspondence, in communion with the geologists working in Banff. And her drawings here are made with graphite, of course, a mineral extracted from the region. And also a second example of this emotion. Oh no, sorry, this is an example. I only have one for the emotion of observation. I've moved on now to the third scenario, which is the social encounter, and illustrated this through the work of Cecilia Ciccarini, who just completed the residency during COVID at the Mahler and Lewitt studios in Spoleto in Italy. And she has an MA in textile design at Chelsea College of Arts. And she says, or she asks herself, what does it mean to make art for the environment? I consider the environment not only from a planetary view, but with an on-the-ground perspective where art is a medium to understand how things are made and what resources are used. This knowledge is another form of care for the natural environment and its inhabitants. Art and imagination are political tools to produce new forms of action. What I really thought was important in the work that Cecilia did was the interaction, the social interaction that she undertook with the local inhabitants around the region. And for example, she visited museums, she visited specialists in textile dyeing and the art of conserving and preserving ancient traditions. And here pictured is a regional weave, a Perugina design, and the color blue is produced from a local plant called the woad. It's a natural dye tradition which is being practiced by Alessandra, who's holding a ball of woad leaves that it actually creates this amazing blue color. And meeting the protagonists here in the Spoleto region and learning through oral transmission was instrumental to her outcomes. And we sincerely hope that she will use the knowledge gained here to continue on a PhD course at the university. And finally, the last example that I've chosen is Naomi Bailey Cooper, who was a PhD, practice-based student, PhD student in textiles at the London College of Fashion. And she worked with a dendrologist who extracted samples, and she saw the process of them extracting samples without harming the trees and used this in her process of textiles. So what she's doing is creating a binding of yarn. So she's woven the yarn around the trees and is retracing the bark formations. And then back in the studio, she will weave that back to try and recreate those same textures that she's recording in the same manner that the dendrologists record in the Amazon. So to go back to the question, it goes without saying that each of our residency is guilty of an environmental footprint, even if the majority of our partners are rooted in Europe, which is why transmission underpins the experience. And I believe this sincerely, that it's our duty to pass on our observations, emotions, and knowledge gained from these experiences. And as practitioners, of course, we seek to interpret these in multiple ways, and we can do this through exhibitions. There's an example that we staged an exhibition at the Nunnery Gallery in Beaux-Arts of the alumni of the residency program, and also through symposiums such as the Creative Practice in the Amazon, which presented artists from the discipline of dance, sound, film, fashion, textile, sculpture, and performance who undertook their residency in Lab Verde. And an activity that I believe has the power to incite others to invent, to create new futures on a transformative scale, belongs to the realm of that emotional experience that I talked about in the first instance. Or could we call it embodiment? Art and design have a special role to play in the Anthropocene because they belong to the realm of the imagination and that of emotion and embodiment. Artistic activity, no matter how abstract or removed from rational activity, leaves intriguing and thought-provoking clues that need an emotional energy to decipher and reinterpret. The more artistic traces that are left, the more they are to stimulate curiosity and creativity in others, who in turn may take up action to reinvent new futures. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I was really impressed by the work Lucy is doing in different parts of the world, and I can see that we have a lot in common about our practices. So me, I am an artist. I work mainly with photography and sculpture, but I founded and I ran a residency program called Humus Interdisciplinary. That is based in Veneto, in the northeast of Italy. And we invite international artists to work in marginal rural areas in Veneto. So I want also to go back to the question that Luigi, you put at the beginning. So about the footprint, about the importance of residencies nowadays in this condition of climate changing and also the pandemic situation. And I think that a very important question is why we are traveling and why we are doing residencies. Because I think that me and Lucy, with our programs, we share an idea of art that is in a wider panorama of the production of knowledge and also of research. And also art, I think for us is an instrument to to create new spaces into the community, to open new spaces in the language of communities and how people they interpret the world. And so it's not just something that live into a gallery space or the market of art. I think that this is this is an important distinction. For me, is continue to be very important to travel because residencies, I think that give the opportunity to be close to communities, to be close to environment, and this proximity, this empathy, and this emotional relevance of the relations, of the interaction, I think is an important key to build new futures and new communities. In my experience with Humus Interdisciplinary, I can tell that we for example, the last residency that we did was inside of a museum of peasant civilization, very close to Venice. The museum was closed for 10 years, and they asked us to make a residency into the museum. And actually the museum was a very big problem for the community, because they didn't know how to bring this museum in the future. And the museum was considered as a problem. So when we went there, we invited 4 artists from different parts of the world. And we started to create a very deep connection with the community. And we work in some objects of the museum that were symbols for the community, affective symbols, very emotional symbols for the community. So we started to collect stories from the individuals of the community to build a new narration, also a new museography, a new kind of new display of the museum. And this changed the perception of the museum and also of the reality of the territory where we work. Speaking about also climate changes, I think that one of the important thing about climate change, about the environmental issues, is how community adapts to this situation. So how the community can build a resilience to go through these problems about climate change and about so in this adaptation, in this process, is very important about how the community perceive their potential. And I think that in this way, art is a very strong tool to open this potential. Actually, we worked with Humus, we work in the potential, how the community perceive the value of their heritage, for example, their environment, the landscape, of course, but the objects, the histories. And I think that now that the world is changing so fast, it's very important to bring new perspectives into the community, contemporary perspective. And I think that art is a very important tool to do it. And another thing that I saw that have in common with Lucy is that interdisciplinarity is another very strong point, because to understand and to translate what is happening nowadays in the globalization that is very stratified, is very complex, is important to have the gaze of different disciplines towards the objects of our investigation. And I also want to mention something that for Humus is very important, that is the measure of the impact of our projects. This is super important, not just for us, but also for the people that are interacting with us, that come from outside the world of art and the world of culture in general, especially with politicians. This part of Italy is completely, yeah, is extreme right-handed, this part, and it's not very easy to make those people to understand how it's important to work with art in communities. So with the University of Padova, we developed a method to measure the impact that is based on the language that people use. So it's not numeric, it's based on the words and the sentences that people use and that are going to be modified through the process, the creative process. So I can share the screen just to show you this. That is the periodic table of the discursive elements. That is something similar to the chemical elements, but you have a distinction briefly between some kind of language that maintain the reality as it is, and another use of language that open the reality, that generates new realities. So the green spots that you see, they are the generative, and the red one are the maintenance of the reality. For example, after an exhibition that we did in this area where the museum is, we asked people to fill a form before and after visit the exhibition, and there was a very simple question that was if you are seated in the square of Torre di Mosto, that is the place where we worked, and a traveler asks you to say something about this place, what would you say? So it was very open question, and it's very meaningful, because people before visiting the exhibition or before participating to the process, they would say, this place is wonderful, this place is ugly. So they were judging the place, or they were transmitting some stereotypes about the place. After the exhibition, the people started to open their vocabulary. They started to describe the place. And in this way, we really could see how art could open the meanings of the symbols, of the values, the characteristic of the place. And also another thing that we could record was that people that they weren't from that place, but from other places, after visiting the exhibition, they felt more part of that place, part of that community. So we could really measure how art made those people more aware about the potential of that place. And this is very important to make a shift from a person that is just receiving information, and also that cannot claim about policies or rights. So I felt that they had more instruments also to claim and to describe and fit themselves into that community. So yeah, this is a very brief resume of our experience with Humus, and just another experience that was me as an artist traveling in another residency here in Portugal, in the north of Portugal. The residencies was called Encontros da Primavera, the spring meetings, a residency between art and anthropology. And there I organized a kind of performance, a kind of happening called Convívios da Primavera, where I asked people of this very tiny village in the north of Portugal if they would like to invite to have dinner people that were into this conference of anthropology and contemporary art. So I organized those tables with around 10 people each table. And then in each one of these tables, there was the guest, of course, and then there was an old figure of the village that was the person that know all about the memory and the tradition of the city, and other people, interdisciplinary people. And then I put some question in every one of each tables, and it was very impressive how those people, of course, drinking wine and telling jokes, but the conviviality was a very strategic element to build community and to exchange different knowledge. So yes, I am in favor to travel, to be there, and for me it's a very important part, this proximity. Okay, finished.
Marco, can I ask a question? How much of this can be reproduced online? Because in our second webinar, we discussed about the value of hospitality, which is of course central to artist residencies. And also the argument that came out is that hospitality can be given also digitally and online. But that of course is something that came out of that specific discussion. So my question to you and also to Lucy in a way, how much of these emotions, how much of this knowledge created can also be created online? And this is because we live in COVID times when travel is restricted, and it will be the case for many, many months. And also there will be a question after COVID ends, shall we go back to normality in a way? Shall we go back to our previous travel patterns, like Western society's travel patterns, or shall we travel less simply?
In my opinion, maybe I'm very radical, but I think that very little things can be exchanged online, or specific parts of the process. For example, organization, perfect. I'm running a project here in Lisbon. Is a laboratory between art and anthropology. And of course, all the part of the organization of the project, the organization of the meetings could be held online. And I think that, yeah, meetings also can be held online. But I think that there is a very important part when you go into the other world, in the world of the other, that I think that proximity is very important, in my opinion. So I don't know, Lucy.
Well, absolutely, yes. I mean, one of the proposals, we have a competition element to the residency program at the university. So students submit their portfolio and the proposal project for to undertake one of the residencies. And we had a very interesting proposal for the Lab Verde residency this year, I believe. And the student, to reduce the environmental impact of traveling to Brazil, wanted to make a connection with one of the residents in Lab Verde and to organize a correspondence through the resident, a local resident, a Brazilian resident. This would be somebody locally, so they wouldn't have to take a flight to Brazil. But we're not understanding the reality of the situation. And this is also what Marco is talking about. The reality in this case in Brazil is the reality that there is no Wi-Fi, there is no internet, there is no way that we can have a connection. And this is often the case in the local communities that you've mentioned, and in the Perugina community in Italy, where Cecilia worked. You know, the artisans that are working there don't have the time to connect online, and sometimes don't often have the technology to do that. And when we're working in close proximity to communities, we have to remember there's a reality that we're living in, which is the reality of Zoom and webinars and the university that support us and give us training. And then there's a reality on the ground. So part of the residency program, the Art for the Environment residency program, is to understand these realities, to understand what you're talking about, Marco, the proximity, to establish those bonds. And, you know, what I mentioned, this oral tradition of passing on things that cannot be passed on through technology. Yeah? And also this, why I introduced this idea of the profound connection that humans have with the environment. I mentioned forests. I mean, I feel that when I go to an environment, I wonder why my body has changed, why my psychology has changed, why am I acting in a very different way than I normally would do? Because you talked about that, Marco, too, this displacement from one place to another. And then when we read the scientific information, the scientific data, we understand that actually there are chemical reactions that are taking place that are affecting our body. And this also happens in interactions with people, because we know we emit chemicals when we're talking and when we're bonding and when we're establishing these human interrelations. So certainly we cannot replace this by this virtual experience. And I think it's very important that we continue to have these kinds of residency programs, of course, reducing our environmental footprint as much as we can, but in the cases where it's not possible. And then this brings it back to the idea of transmission. We can't go somewhere if we're not going to then transmit the knowledge about that to others. And, you know, going back to your idea of evaluation, which I think is really important too, you know, when we're creating projects like this, you know, how are we evaluating that? How are we gathering the information of what we're doing? How are we then transmitting that, the data sets that we've collected, and what does it prove? And who's that, you know, who's the quantifying of all of that information going to? So these are questions that I'm constantly asking myself as a, you know, as an academic too, and the kinds of questions that I'll be posing to the residents, the students that are going on their residencies in the future. Okay, one step further, you know, what is how do we manage this impact? You know, how can we understand it, and what is it versus what we bring back to others, and how do we bring back that to others? So yeah, transmission, very important. Transmission, on the one hand, one-to-one being on the residency, and transmission post-residency of the information that we've gathered, the knowledge and the experiences and the emotions.
There is a sentence in Nemonte's letter, which I think stands out, and it's, in all these years of taking, you've not had the respect to get to know us. And my question for you is that, how can you ensure that yourselves as artists, or the people that work with you, travel with respect? How can you measure the respect?
If I can try to answer, this is a topic that I'm going deeper in my PhD in anthropology, and yeah, it's very, the artist sometimes goes, take, and then sell to the collector, goes in the community, make his wonderful work, and then show in the gallery, and then well, that is part of our life. But for example, I think that a strategy could be in touch with the community, and before going there, trying to ask, trying to understand which are the needs of this community, if they are interested in what. I think that is important. Yeah, just to figure out what the community wants from you, and if this is this can be integrated what you want to take. I think this could be a strategy.
It really struck me when I saw the portrait of Nemontine in chemo, and the beauty of her face, and her eyes exaggerated by the red dye. And in fact, going to the Amazon and talking with the local botanists in the Amazon, we understood more about the art of painting faces, painting through the fruits that are collected in the Amazon specifically for this reason, but it also has a medical property too. So realizing that the red dye from the fruit also repels mosquitoes, for example, insects, was really important in understanding, gaining this notion of understanding and getting closer to the traditions and rituals of the Amazon. So, you know, without having gone there, without having discussed, without having talked to, without having put the paint on our faces and understood it and then taken it out into the forest, you know, we're missing the connection, we're missing keys in order to gain that knowledge and to immerse ourselves in what she was talking about, you know, the knowledge that they've gained over hundreds and hundreds of years. You know, we go there effectively for 3 weeks, but we do take back information that we can transmit.
I'm aware that Marco has to leave us soon because he has another presentation. Very, very busy, but that's good. It's about spreading knowledge. But there are actually a couple of questions that I might ask Lucy to answer. The first question is about where to find nature, and it reads as follows: considering that more than half the world's population lives in urban environments, don't we need to pay more attention to urban nature and discover what is surrounding us, and to value urban nature more for offering artist residencies in what seems more mundane, but what is our contemporary reality too?
Yes, we do have residencies in the urban environment, and actually a residency will be taking place in the month of November in the East End of London in Waltham Forest. And these are the questions we've asked our residents to interrogate during the residency, the environment around them. And yes, I absolutely agree. We have environment in our backyard. And you know, when I talk about the Amazon for me is a metaphor, because what we can learn from the rainforest, we can also apply that to our daily lives, absolutely. And we do as much as possible. And the reason that the Art for the Environment program, as I mentioned previously, we have partnerships in different locations around the world. It's so that we can get these, to have these kinds of experience and offer these kinds of experiences to our students. And students will choose those according to their interests as well.
There's another question from Martin, who runs a small residency in rural Iceland. I think about how to reduce the effects from flying, and one idea I had was to plant a forest in the treeless fjord and have the artist add to that. Are there other on-site ideas you might suggest?
Perhaps that's the kind of residency that you could offer online. Off the top of my head, I can't think of any. But you give me another couple of hours, I'll have like 100 ideas. Well,
if there's no other question, I thank a lot Lucy for her time, and of course Marco as well. It has been great to have you. I think it's very important to keep the issue about the environmental impact of what we do very high in our own agenda as art professionals, but also in the agenda of the organizations we work with and we work for. It is urgent. There needs to be a sense of urgency. One of the main risks of COVID is that because of course COVID is bringing like a strong economic downturn, the very feeble improvements that were made to protect the environment will be withdrawn, will be forgotten, because economic growth needs to happen to be able to go back to normality again. And I think this is a big danger. And I think we are underestimating the damage that we are doing to our own environment and what we are stealing from future generations. We are taking something which is definitely not ours. And as much as artists and culture professionals, they, as part of the work, they need to go, they need to see, they need to reflect, they need to express their own feelings and emotions, their own ideas about what they see, and I think they can also help the general public as well as themselves, giving new views, new perspectives on the issues. But at the same time, there needs to be an understanding of what it means to travel from an environmental and social point of view. This is the end of our webinar series. We're really grateful to all our speakers. We are grateful to IASPIS and also to Creative Victoria for their support. Our webinars have been all recorded. The recordings are made available on Resartis website, www.resartis.org. They are all captioned and of course freely available, and you're all welcome to go and check them out and share them widely.